What's up, dudes? This is Jesus Loving Buddy making a video called Proving the Authenticity of Christianity, Part Dos. I almost forgot the title. I want to thank K87 Jury. He made a video response to my videos, and he kind of exposed some of my mistakes and stuff. So I thank you for that, bro. It really helps my videos be better, and it's good for different beliefs and as far as communication and stuff goes, like me and KD87 almost feel like we're buddies now. We should play poker together, go fishing or something. But yes, I'm doing put some touch ups on that video. Anyways, now I'm going to talk about the flood of Noah. In doing this, I used an exponential growth and decay formula. So if the flood of Noah, as described in Genesis 5 through 10, really did happen, then there should be some evidence for it, and I'll make my case for that. And like I said, this is my thing. If you don't agree with it, I totally understand that. The formula I use is A equals T in parentheses 1 plus R to the power of T. So then we should have 8 people at the growth rate of 0.468 for 4,400 years, and you should get about 6.8 billion people. And that's how many people are in the world today, which works out pretty good. But what's important here is, like, when I did this, I solved for the growth rate, and I then determined that that's 0.468 rounded off. It's not bad. It's not a bad growth rate, especially compared to the evolutionary model, which is what I'm going to compare it to. So, like I said, the growth rate is not constant, and so you can't really you can do an average of it, but to get a more exact uh, what's the word I'm looking for? To get more exact numbers, you would have to use a different type of formula, and I'll go into that later. But okay, so we've looked at the creation side, and now let's look at the evolution side. If we use the same formula and say that two people, just assuming that two people started the Earth's population 50,000 years ago, and that's pretty generous because most people will say that humans came into or evolved 100,000 years ago, and some even say up to 250,000 years ago. But anyways, if two people started the Earth's population 50,000 years ago, to derive at a population of 6.8 billion, you'd have to have a growth rate of 0.0000438950,459, and this is an extremely small growth rate, and obviously it doesn't make sense. That growth rate cannot sustain a population. It's too incredibly small. It just doesn't make sense. I did the math the other day. I didn't put it in my notes, but um, that would mean that the first couple wouldn't have had a kid until they were like 9,000 years old, which is pretty. It doesn't make a lot of sense. That's like I said, that's my perspective, and that's the way. That's what I believe. And these are numbers. Numbers don't lie. So, but remember, like I said, most people believe that humans came to existence a good 200,000 years ago. So take this growth population times 4, and it's way out there. But like I said, I realize that this is an average of an exponential growth formula. Thus, my weakness in my argument is that growth rates are never constant. So my argument is flawed in that sense. But it does have some merit because it just exposes the broad spectrum of things. The better way to prove my point would use differential functions to find a more accurate growth rate, which includes things like natural disasters, wars, famines, and stuff like that, which I'm working on that right now. But I still argue that growth rate in itself would expose just kind of how off the wall it is to propose that people came into existence 50,000 years ago, and even more so if someone says 250,000 years ago, rather than 4,400, considering we now have a population of 6.8. So if we human beings really have existed for 50,000 years, or up to a quarter of a million years, then your population would have to be in the hundreds of billions. Some claim that wars, natural disasters, and things account for this, why the population is so small, but we just don't have the physical evidence such as fossils, to claim that we've existed that long. For example, we have plenty of dinosaur fossils to prove that they exist and things. So, but that doesn't. But we do not have the human fossils to prove this claim. I use the example of we have millions of dinosaur fossils because some people will say fossilization is a very rare thing, but if we have so many dinosaur fossils but we don't have enough human fossils to prove this, and we don't have transitional forms and things like that, then you would, it kind of, there's like a gap there. Okay, now I'm going to talk about Old Testament prophecies. Daniel 9:24 through 27 states that 490 years, once translated into our calendar, because the Jewish people had a different calendar, that after the decree is made to rebuild Jerusalem, the Messiah will enter Jerusalem. And that decree was later made in 460 BC, and in 30 AD, Jesus Christ rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, and that day is now called Palm Sunday. So celebrate! Psalm 22. I almost said Palm. Psalm 22 was written between 1010 BC to 970 BC, and it describes the crucifixion experience that Christ would go through 200 years before crucifixion was even invented. The chapter discusses a person being mocked, being surrounded by evil men. They have pierced his hands and his feet, and all his bones can be counted, or they're not broken, which is significant because a person's bones or his legs were usually broken when a person was being crucified. His clothes were also cast out in lots. And this describes exactly what Jesus went through. Further yet, Jesus is described in Matthew 24:26 and in Mark 15:34 saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Which is exactly how Psalm 22 starts. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. And some will argue that the book of Psalms is not prophetic, but if you look at Luke 24:44, it states that all things in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled. And Jesus himself is saying that, I believe. And also, Isaiah 53 predicts how Christ would come, suffer for our sins, bring us peace and reconciliation with God. And this is further evidence that Jesus was God in the flesh. So, how do we know this is all true? We know that the Old Testament has not been perverted by humans because we have things such as the Dead Sea Scrolls that date back hundreds of years before the New Testament was written. Thus, we can pinpoint when a prophecy was made, and we can also pinpoint when it came true. And that also disproves the idea that somebody just sat down and wrote the Old Testament and then wrote the New Testament or something like that. Because if so, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Also, I'd like to say that the Dead Sea Scrolls do not have any evidence contrary to what the Bible states. Some people have come up to me and they're like, well, what about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Don't they disprove Jesus and this stuff? And I'm like, nay, my friend, they do not. Running out of time. Okay, I'm just going to bust through this. Now I'm going to talk about the Gospels. Mark was written about 60 to 75 AD. It was written down by John Mark, but it was the eyewitness account of the Apostle Peter. We know this because historian Eusebius recorded early church Papias confirming it. Matthew was written by Matthew, a.k.a. Levi, of one of Jesus' disciples. Luke was written by Luke, a historian, a.k.a. the Apostle Paul's beloved physician, around 60 to 85 A.D. John was written by John, one of Jesus' disciples, about 65 to 95 A.D. Thus, we can conclude that the Gospels were either written by an eyewitness or an interview with an eyewitness to the events of Jesus Christ. Also, we have over 5,000 first century Greek manuscripts, while the Homer's Iliad has about 600 manuscripts, and the oldest dating back to 1,000 after it was written. By the same criteria, the Gospels are looking pretty good. Some will claim that because the Gospels were written 30 to 40 years later, that myths and legends would have perverted the truth about Jesus. But no, if we compare it to the biographies of Alexander the Great, which were written in which were written in 323 BC, which was 400 years after his death, we can see that the Gospels would have had less time to bring about legends. So if we consider Alexander the Great's biographies to be true, which scholars agree that they are, then we must consider the Gospels to be true as well. Also, even though the Gospels were written 30 to 40 years after events, the Apostle Paul demonstrates that Christians consider Jesus to have died for our sins, and he made a list of the people he appeared to in his resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15, in which he would have given the creed, which he would have received this creed from the other apostles in 35 AD. This creed was one of the original fundamentals of the Christian